Welcome to People in Profit, where we look at how business shapes our world. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up, the Brexit election. We look at the economic headwinds that'll face the next British Prime Minister. Thinking positively, the economic historian who says we're better off than we've ever been. And beachside bother, the seaside clubs threatened by a change in French law. First, though, to the election campaign in the United Kingdom, which has been largely dominated by Brexit. Starting talks on leaving the European Union will be the first major challenge facing the next Prime Minister. Those negotiations will take place against a background of rising inflation and muted economic growth. Theresa May and her main rival, Jeremy Corbyn, know that there's a battle ahead.
We are approaching the end of a long campaign, but it's crucial that everybody remembers this important fact. Britain is about to enter into the most important negotiations of my lifetime. They begin just 11 days after polling day, and the European Union is already adopting an aggressive negotiating position. That's why, now more than ever, Britain needs a strong government and a strong Prime Minister capable of standing up to Brussels.
We won't threaten Europe with turning this country into a sort of corporate tax haven with low tax, low wages and low investment. We want high wage, high investment, growing economy with good relations with our neighbours and indeed, of course, with the rest of the world. Well, on that...
So that's what the politicians are saying. Kate Moody's been looking at some of the economic challenges ahead for the UK and how markets are preparing for the election. Kate.
Well, Stephen, the first economic indicator to grab headlines is GDP growth. Britain's economy defied expectations by expanding in the months post-Brexit, though it experienced a sharp slowdown at the beginning of this year, growing just 0.2% in the first 3 months. Beyond that are economic factors that impact people's daily lives. Prices have risen at their fastest pace in years, reflecting the slump in the value of sterling and hitting an annual rate of 2.7% in April. While unemployment has dropped to its lowest level in decades, household debt is soaring towards new highs. Keeping inflation and spending power in balance will be a key priority for the next government. On a corporate level, fear of losing access to the European market has left many financial institutions looking for new European bases. Business investment in the UK has remained fairly solid so far, rising about 0.8% in the first 3 months of the year. But it could slow as time goes on if Brexit negotiations don't go smoothly. Some business leaders hope to avoid that by setting up a special group to improve communication with the government. The pound sterling is another key bellwether. It's dropped fairly steadily since the Brexit vote in June, and currency markets expect the Conservative Party to maintain control. But exchange rates could swing depending on how big the victory is. Analysts estimate anything short of a 50-seat majority for Theresa May could weigh on the already weak British currency. Stephen?
Kate, thank you very much for that. Now, Donald Trump was elected on a promise of making America great again. In voting for him, voters supported the idea that things were better in the past. It's a view backed up by surveys that tell us people are generally pessimistic about the future. My next guest has a different view. Johan Norberg is a Swedish author and academic who's written a book claiming there's never been a better time to be alive. In English, it's called Progress, 10 Reasons to Look Forward to the Future. In French, interestingly, it's called No, Things Weren't Better Before. Johan Norberg, you're very welcome to the programme. Thank you for coming in to us.
Thank you for having me.
It's an interesting point how your book has a different name in French and a different name in English. When you were researching this, do you find that pessimism and optimism is portrayed differently in different places?
Well, yeah, my French friends tell me that in France, if you're optimistic, some people, they interpret that as you're not really being intelligent enough to be gloomy about the world. So, yeah, I think there's more opposition there. Let's
get down to the subject of this book. Why are things better now than they've ever been?
Well, if you look objectively on when was the era when people lived the longest lives, in the most wealth, the best health, and in the most safety, it's now, in this present day and age. Every minute that we talk about these things and complain about the world, another 100 people rise out of extreme poverty.
There's a perception from generation to generation, this idea of, things were better before, and people often look, at their people, I'm in my 30s, people my age look at their parents and say, well, it was much easier for them to buy a house and to live longer. Is it understandable that people have this pessimism about things being better before?
Actually, every generation has that. When historians look at the previous generation, the previous era, the one we think of as the good old days. What did they think? Well, most often they said, this present era is filled with risks, threats and horrors. It must have been much easier in the past. So I think this nostalgia is always there. Partly, I think this is almost psychological, biological, because when you ask people when was the golden era, they often happen to mention the era in which they grew up, because then they were young, the world was exciting, but they didn't have to pay the bills and they didn't have kids. Then they grow up, they get children, and they have to think about everything that can go wrong in the world and in their own private life.
When we look at the issue of poverty in particular, we're almost, inundated with statistics and images about the level of poverty that exists in the world. But that's something that's been improving as well.
Oh yeah, more now than ever before in history. In the last 25 years, we've seen a reduction by 3/4 of extreme poverty, as measured by the World Bank and the United Nations. 138,000 people were lifted out of extreme poverty every day over these last 25 years. So this is the era when we complain the most, probably because we have now the best imagery of everything that goes wrong in the world. But this is the era when we might even abolish extreme poverty as we know it.
You've written in the past about your support for globalization, how you think that it's a good thing and it's helped the advancement of the world. There is a very strong opposite viewpoint to that. Do you understand where those people are coming from?
Oh, sure, and globalization causes change and disruption. And obviously that's not always popular, and sometimes people are hurt by that. But the problem is that we always focus on the things that's most visible, the things that we can see, that's close to us. We can see when a factory has to close down because of competition from other places. But it might be that that factory would not even have been there without globalization. When you look at Europe, somewhere between 40 to 50% of our purchasing power, of the average person's purchasing power, comes from international trade. The fact that international trade, free trade, has brought down the prices of everything that we buy, so that we have more purchasing power to buy new things, to invest in new businesses, technologies, education, healthcare. And that's why it's a bit complicated to explain, because that's not visible, because it's not visible here or in the news. It's in our refrigerators, it's in our clothes.
Does globalization get a bad rap? Should we be greater support of it? Does it need more people like you standing up for globalization?
I think it does, because whatever the problem is in the world, it's always so easy to blame the foreigners, to blame the rest of the world, because it's a sympathetic scapegoat in a way. So therefore we need to explain how the economic structure functions, because basically the fact that we have these living standards that we do is because of globalization.
Do you think this trajectory will continue? Will things keep getting better for the human race? Are there warning signs out there?
I think there are warning signs, because this progress is dependent on our freedom to explore new knowledge and experiment with it in technologies, new business models, and exchange this across borders. Well, we know historically that we don't always get that freedom to do that. We've had a period of globalization, a more open Europe and so on, but there have been eras before when fear of the rest of the world, fear about everything from minorities to neighboring countries, results in us shutting the borders, shutting our minds. And that could happen again. And I think this populist wave that we've seen in Europe and in the United States, that's something that scares me. That's something that doesn't get better.
Do you feel that, a lot of people have said with the victory of Emmanuel Macron here in France, for example, that perhaps populism is past its peak? Do you think that's the case, or are you concerned of another surge in that direction?
I think that the factors that built up this wave of populism and nationalism, they're still there. And the fact that Le Pen got so many votes is a sign of that. I don't think it's going away. But I think I watch France very closely right now, and I think a lot of people around the world does, because here we've seen this political realignment in a big way, where opponents of globalization from the left to the right have sort of aligned, and so has the proponents, the advocates. The fact that Macron ran on a very optimistic message about an open world, about globalization, is very interesting. How that'll turn out will be important for the rest of the world.
OK, Johan Norberg, thank you very much for coming in to speak to us.
Thank you.
Now, here in France, people have been heading to the beach as temperatures rise. Beachside bars and restaurants are a €1 billion industry, but their owners say they're facing disaster because of rules that limit how much of the sand can be cordoned off by private enterprises. Brian Quinn reports.
Bernard Matarazzo is the proprietor of a private beach club called La Bretagne. It's been around for over 40 years, and Matarazzo knows all his regular clients. Here in Jean-les-Pins on the Côte d'Azur, 21 private beach clubs, including La Bretagne, are scheduled to be dismantled in September. It would be a drastic change for this beach. For private managers, it's an economic disaster in the making.
There won't be any more private beaches in Jean-les-Pins or Antibes or Cannes, and people will go elsewhere. That will mean less of them in the hotels, restaurants and nightclubs.
In France, by law, no one can own the beach, but local governments can grant concessions, leases of up to 12 years on sections of beach, which cost between 15,000 and 100,000 euros per year. In 2006, the government banned permanent constructions and tightened restrictions on how much beach could be privatized, making many long-time businesses illegal. The law does allow for a possible solution for those who might lose their businesses: rebuilding smaller, removable structures. Club owners say that's too expensive.
Removable equipment is expensive, and so storage. Constantly breaking down and setting up does a lot of damage too. What we're hoping for is to only have to dismantle at the end of the lease.
Private beach clubs are a fixture on the Côte d'Azur, but on the nearby Free Beach, there's strong support for the law.
The beach is for everyone. There shouldn't be a partition between rich and poor.
Private beach club managers on the Côte d'Azur have one last hope. They've asked their union to meet with the new government to try again to soften the application of the law.
That's all from us for this week. If you have any questions or comments on the stories we've covered, you can get in touch on Facebook at France 24 Business, or you can tweet me at NewStephen. Until next time, thanks for watching.